You begin here, already held. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. You are floating, the way a body floats when it finally remembers how. Beneath you, a calm, dark water carries your weight without effort. Above you, the sky stretches wide and open, scattered with soft points of light that do not flicker or rush. They simply exist. You breathe in, and the air feels cool and clean. You breathe out, and your shoulders loosen, just a little more. This is where understanding begins. Not with motion, but with rest. You let the idea of space drift toward you slowly. Not as rockets or metal or noise, but as distance. As quiet. As a horizon that does not demand attention, yet somehow keeps it. Somewhere far beyond where your eyes can reach, there are asteroids. You do not picture them as spinning rocks or dramatic collisions. Instead, they feel like islands. Old ones. Patient ones. They have been waiting offshore for a very long time. The water around you moves in gentle patterns. Small waves pass beneath your back, lifting and lowering you in a steady rhythm. This is the rhythm of the tide, and it feels familiar, even if you cannot explain why. The tide has always been there, shaping coastlines, shaping choices, shaping the slow story of how humans move through the world. You notice your breath again. In. Out. Each breath like a small wave arriving, then retreating. The idea of wealth in space does not arrive loudly. It does not crash onto the shore. It comes the way tides always do, gradually, quietly, almost politely. At first, it is just a suggestion. A sense that something far away might someday matter. That something distant might eventually become close enough to touch. Asteroid mining sounds like a sharp phrase, but here it softens. It becomes less about taking and more about noticing. You are not imagining drills or machines yet. You are simply aware that these islands carry things. Metals. Water. Materials shaped by time so vast it barely fits into thought. They are not rushing toward you. They are simply there. You float and think about how curiosity works. It does not sprint. It drifts. It follows gentle currents, the way water follows the moon. Humans have always done this. They notice what gathers quietly. They move toward places where something accumulates. Not all at once. Not all together. Just enough to slowly change direction. A distant hum settles into the background, like the sound of wind far away or a ship you cannot see. It is comforting, steady, and unimportant in the best way. Your mind does not cling to it. It simply lets it exist. You smile a little, because part of you realizes something gently amusing. Even when floating in space, even when imagining cosmic tides and asteroid islands, the human brain still wonders if it left the stove on. It always does that. You let the thought drift away, unbothered, like a leaf passing by. The science here does not ask for attention. It waits. Asteroids are remnants, you remember, leftovers from the slow forming of planets. They are not dramatic actors. They are archives. They carry records of early processes, early materials, early arrangements. They are quiet libraries, drifting in the dark. You do not need to open the books yet. Instead, you feel the warmth of the imagined water beneath you. It holds steady. The tide continues its patient motion. You notice how value, even here, does not feel like numbers or urgency. It feels like potential. Like something that could matter later, if conditions are right, if the shore slowly changes. This is how economics begins, you realize. Not with prices, but with patterns. With noticing where things gather and how difficult it is to reach them. With sensing whether the effort feels gentle or forced. Right now, this effort is only a thought, and the thought is light. Your breathing deepens again. In. Out. Each exhale carries a sense of safety with it. You imagine the asteroids again, but now they feel closer, not in distance, but in familiarity. They are still far offshore, but they are no longer strange. They feel like the next curve of coastline you have not walked yet. The tide is already moving toward them, whether anyone is watching or not. A soft light spreads across the water, like moonlight sliding between clouds. It reflects, breaks, reforms. You watch it without analyzing it. Understanding does not need to be sharp tonight. It only needs to be present. There is something comforting about realizing that this story is not about sudden change. It is about slow arrival. About how ideas drift inward before they ever take shape. Asteroid mining, in this moment, is not an industry or a plan. It is a distant shore that has just entered awareness. You notice how your body feels heavier, in a good way. Supported. Anchored by the water, even as it moves. The tide does not pull you anywhere you are not ready to go. Somewhere in the distance, the hum deepens slightly, like a reminder that motion exists even when it is invisible. Space itself feels like that vast movement, mostly unseen, always ongoing. You are not separate from it. You are floating within the same rules, the same patience. Another small thought drifts through. Humans have always looked outward when the shoreline felt crowded. Riverbanks, valleys, coasts. Space is different only in distance, not in spirit. That realization settles softly, without judgment. You breathe in again, slowly, and let the idea rest. The tide continues to rise and fall beneath you, unbothered by plans or timelines. It carries stories forward whether anyone listens or not. Tonight, you are listening. Just enough. As your breath settles into an even rhythm, you sense the water nudging you almost imperceptibly. Not toward action, but toward attention. The tide is not here to rush you. It is here to invite you closer, one gentle wave at a time, toward a shore that is still forming in the dark. You are still floating when this chapter begins. The water beneath you has not changed, but your awareness has widened. The sky above feels deeper now, less like a ceiling and more like an open archive. You breathe in slowly. You breathe out even more slowly. The tide keeps its rhythm, and your body seems to remember something older than thought. Humans, you realize, have always followed resources the way water follows gravity. Not eagerly. Not greedily. Just naturally. You let your mind drift backward, the way rivers drift toward the sea. You picture early people settling near water, not because they planned to, but because water gathered there. Fish gathered there. Soil softened there. Life slowed down just enough to stay. Value, even then, was never abstract. It was where things paused long enough to be useful. You feel comfort in this memory, even if it is not your own. The tide beneath you seems to nod, rising and falling in agreement. Resources have always shaped paths, not through force, but through invitation. When movement slows, things accumulate. When things accumulate, attention follows. This is not strategy. It is pattern. Your breath moves in and out like a small echo of that truth. You imagine coastlines forming, grain by grain, shaped by waves that never hurry. No single wave decides the shore. No single moment defines value. It is repetition that does the work. The same motion, returning again and again, until something stable appears. This is how economics feels when it is stripped of urgency. It feels like memory. Asteroids enter this memory gently. They do not interrupt it. They extend it. You sense them not as foreign objects, but as the next place where movement has slowed. Far away, yes. Difficult to reach, certainly. But patient. Always patient. You smile faintly at the thought that even rocks in space are better at waiting than most humans. They have had plenty of practice. The water around you grows warmer, or maybe you are simply more relaxed. The distant hum continues, low and steady, like something working in the background without asking for praise. You do not need to focus on it. You only need to know it is there. Asteroids, you remember, are leftovers. Not waste, but remainder. Material that never quite joined the larger bodies. They drift where they formed, carrying the same ingredients that once shaped planets. In this way, they are less like treasure chests and more like memories that never settled into a final form. You feel reassured by that. Nothing about this is rushed. Nothing about it is sharp. Space is not new in the way people sometimes mean. It is only farther from the shore you know. The tide that shaped riverbanks and coastlines is the same tide that now reaches outward, thin and quiet, into the dark. You breathe in again. Your chest rises gently. You breathe out. Your thoughts soften. There is a tiny moment of humor that drifts through you. Humans crossed oceans in wooden boats and called it destiny. Now they look at space and call it impossible. Perspective, you think, is a funny thing. The tide does not laugh, but it does continue. You imagine the long arc of history as a shoreline seen from above. Settlements appear where movement slows. Trade routes trace the easiest currents. Resources do not create desire, they respond to it. They wait until someone is calm enough to notice. Asteroids are still waiting. You feel no pressure to reach them. The story does not demand action yet. It only asks for recognition. This, too, belongs to the same pattern. A new shoreline does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, as the tide lowers and raises, over and over. Your body feels heavier now, pleasantly so. Supported by the water, supported by repetition. The idea that patterns repeat rather than break brings a quiet relief. It means the future does not have to be loud to be real. The tide beneath you pulls back slightly, then returns. Each cycle feels like a breath taken by the world itself. In this rhythm, asteroid mining becomes less of a leap and more of a continuation. Another place where movement may someday slow, where materials may gather, where attention may rest. You are not there yet. That is part of the comfort. A soft light passes across the water again, dimmer this time, like dusk settling in layers. You let your thoughts drift without holding onto them. Rivers, coasts, islands, asteroids. All part of the same slow sentence, written by motion and patience. You realize that value has always followed ease, not force. Where access becomes gentle enough, use follows. Where effort outweighs need, waiting continues. The tide understands this without explanation. Your breathing stays slow. In. Out. In. Out. Somewhere far away, the next shoreline remains barely visible. You do not strain to see it. You trust that the tide knows where it is going. With each exhale, the horizon feels a little nearer, and you drift quietly toward whatever waits beyond the calm. You continue floating, but something subtly shifts. The water beneath you feels the same, steady and warm, yet your attention drifts downward now, as if curiosity itself has weight. You breathe in slowly, feeling the air move through you. You breathe out, letting the sound of it fade into the distance. The tide lifts you, then lowers you again, patient as ever. You begin to think about what the islands offshore are made of. Asteroids no longer feel like distant shapes. They feel closer, not in space, but in understanding. You imagine them drifting quietly, each one a slow-moving vessel carrying its contents without announcement. There is no sense of urgency inside them. No ticking clock. Just material held in long suspension. You picture their surfaces as calm, uneven landscapes, shaped by time rather than intention. Beneath those surfaces, layers rest gently against one another. Metals formed in ancient heat. Water locked into stone. Elements arranged by processes so slow they feel almost kind. The science enters your thoughts the way moonlight enters a room. Softly. Without asking permission. Asteroids, you remember, are remnants from the early days of formation. They never became planets, not because they failed, but because conditions nudged them elsewhere. They cooled where they drifted. They kept what they had. In doing so, they became records, holding onto materials the rest of the system moved past. You find that comforting. Your breath stays slow. In. Out. In. Out. You do not list what is inside these stones. You feel it instead. Weight. Density. Promise. Not the promise of profit, but the promise of presence. These materials exist whether anyone looks at them or not. They are complete without attention. The tide beneath you rolls gently, as if agreeing. You imagine abundance the way you imagine rain clouds gathering. There is no rush. No guarantee of release. Just fullness, waiting for the right moment. This is how asteroid resources feel. They are not knocking at the door. They are standing quietly in the distance, hands in pockets, perfectly content to wait. A small smile drifts across your thoughts. Humans, you think, are very bad at waiting. Even when lying down, even when floating, part of the mind wants a schedule. The stones do not care. They have never checked a calendar. The distant hum returns, steady and low, like something breathing far away. It blends with your own breath until it is hard to tell which is which. This blending feels important, though you cannot say why. You imagine slicing through an asteroid, slowly, carefully, not with tools but with attention. You notice how materials arrange themselves naturally. Heavier elements settle. Lighter ones linger closer to the surface. Not as rules, but as tendencies. Patterns that repeat because they work. This is science without sharp edges. Explanation without demand. You feel no urge to measure. No need to quantify. Understanding arrives as texture rather than data. Smooth here. Dense there. Cool surfaces warmed faintly by distant sunlight. Everything held in balance by motion so gentle it feels like stillness. You breathe again. The water supports you without comment. Abundance, you realize, does not always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels quiet. Sometimes it feels like knowing there is enough even if you never touch it. Asteroids carry that feeling well. They do not advertise. They simply exist, full in their own way. The tide begins to shift, almost imperceptibly. It is not pulling you forward yet. It is turning inward, as if asking a question rather than offering an answer. What makes something valuable? You let the question hover without trying to solve it. Value, tonight, does not feel like extraction or use. It feels like relationship. Like recognizing that something has worth even before it becomes useful. Even if it never does. Your body feels heavier now, as if sinking a little deeper into the water. Supported. Held. Safe. A faint warmth spreads through your chest, the kind that comes from understanding without effort. You do not need to know how to mine an asteroid. You only need to know that what sleeps inside these stones has waited long enough to be considered gently. You think, briefly, that calling them stones feels unfair. They have traveled farther than most stories. They have survived collisions, emptiness, silence. They have carried their contents faithfully through all of it. That deserves a little respect. The humor returns, soft and kind. Humans name things to feel close to them, and then forget to listen. You decide to listen instead. The water laps softly around you. The tide does not rush its questions. It never has. It only turns them over, again and again, until they feel smooth enough to hold. Your breathing slows even more. In. Out. You sense that understanding the contents of these stones is not about ownership. It is about timing. About whether the tide will ever make reaching them feel gentle rather than forced. The stones will wait either way. As the thought settles, you feel the tide shift again, drawing your attention away from what sleeps inside the islands and toward what humans choose to call worth. The water carries you softly onward, rotating you just enough to face the next idea, as if the question itself is about to surface. You float inside a pause. Not an empty one, but a full one. The kind that arrives after a long breath and stays just long enough to feel intentional. The water beneath you is calm, almost motionless now, as if the tide itself has decided to listen. You breathe in slowly. You breathe out, and the pause remains. This is where value begins, before numbers ever appear. You notice how your body feels when nothing is being counted. Your shoulders are loose. Your jaw is unclenched. Your thoughts move without urgency, drifting like reflections on water. In this stillness, economics feels different. Softer. Less like a system and more like a conversation that has not started speaking yet. Value, you realize, is not born from price. It is born from agreement. Long before markets, people sensed worth through trust, through repetition, through the quiet understanding that something would be there tomorrow if it was treated gently today. You feel this truth settle into you, warm and reassuring, like sunlight filtered through clouds. The tide beneath you barely moves. It hovers, suspended. You think about how effort and need meet. Not sharply, but gradually. Value forms where patience lives long enough to notice opportunity. When effort feels proportional. When reaching does not feel like strain. This balance is subtle, and the tide knows it well. Push too hard, and the water resists. Move gently, and it carries you. Asteroid mining drifts into your awareness again, but it feels different now. Less like an action, more like a question. Not how much, but when. Not how fast, but how gently. The islands offshore remain distant, their contents untouched, their presence unthreatening. You find comfort in that distance. Your breath slows. In. Out. Economics, stripped of urgency, feels almost human. It listens. It waits for alignment. It notices when effort outweighs return and quietly suggests patience instead. You smile at the thought that the most powerful systems often whisper rather than shout. A tiny flicker of humor drifts through you. Somewhere, someone once tried to put a price on silence. It did not sell very well. You let the thought dissolve, amused but relaxed. The science beneath this idea remains calm. Resources gain meaning only when they can be reached without harm outweighing benefit. Until then, they are potential, not promise. Asteroids exist in this state now. Not wasted. Not ignored. Simply waiting for conditions to soften. You feel how safe that waiting feels. The water warms slightly, or perhaps your awareness does. The distant hum fades into something almost like a lullaby, steady and unremarkable. You do not need to focus on it. It holds the background together for you. Value, you sense, is relational. It depends on context, care, and timing. The same resource can feel priceless or irrelevant depending on how gently it fits into the larger flow. The tide teaches this without explanation. It erodes cliffs slowly and nourishes shores patiently, never asking which outcome is more valuable. You breathe again. In. Out. Asteroid mining, framed this way, loses its sharp edges. It is no longer about extraction or conquest. It becomes a possibility space, suspended like the tide at its turning point. The moment before water decides whether to advance or retreat. You notice how uncertainty feels here. It does not tighten your chest. It does not demand answers. It feels held, like something resting in open hands. There is comfort in not knowing yet. In letting questions remain soft. The islands offshore seem unchanged, but you sense them differently now. They are not waiting to be claimed. They are waiting to be understood. Their value is not locked inside them. It emerges only when relationship forms. This thought settles deeply. Your body feels heavier, pleasantly grounded, as if the water beneath you has thickened slightly. You are not sinking. You are being supported more completely. The pause continues, generous and unhurried. You realize that economics, at its calmest, is about restraint. About knowing when not to act. About recognizing that potential can be preserved by patience rather than diminished by delay. The tide honors this wisdom effortlessly. A faint light glides across the surface of the water, then fades. You watch it without following it. Understanding does not need to chase anything tonight. Your breathing remains slow, steady, reliable. Each breath reassures you that nothing is required right now. No decision. No movement. Just presence. The tide stays suspended, balanced between motion and rest. You feel that balance inside yourself. Value without a price tag. Worth without urgency. Possibility without demand. As the pause gently begins to loosen, you sense that the tide will move again soon. Not abruptly. Not loudly. Just enough to carry you forward into the next idea. For now, it waits with you, calm and attentive, before choosing the direction of its next slow, patient touch. You notice the water moving again. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind you that even rest has direction. The tide beneath you begins a slow, deliberate roll, carrying your body forward with almost no sensation of effort. You breathe in, feeling your chest rise. You breathe out, and the motion continues without asking anything from you. Distance, you realize, is not a number here. It is a feeling. You sense it in the way the water stretches between where you are and where the shoreline waits. Distance feels like effort held gently, like a long walk taken without hurry. It is not about how far something is. It is about how it feels to reach for it. Tonight, reaching feels calm. Asteroids return to your thoughts, drifting ahead like faint silhouettes on the horizon. They are still islands, still quiet, still patient. What lies between you and them is not emptiness, but process. Motion. Care. The slow accumulation of capability. You breathe again. In. Out. The cost of reaching space does not arrive as a bill or a ledger. It arrives as layers of effort. Fuel is not counted, it is felt as weight that must be lifted gently. Time is not measured, it is sensed as patience stretched across years. Care is not listed, it is embedded in every choice to move slowly instead of forcefully. The tide understands this kind of cost well. When water reaches a distant shore, it does not rush there all at once. It moves gradually, testing the ground, retreating when it must, advancing when conditions allow. Reaching asteroids feels the same. Not like a leap, but like learning how to swim a little farther each time without exhausting yourself. You smile softly at that image. Swimming farther, not faster. Technology drifts into view beside you, and it is surprisingly quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not shine or roar. It simply keeps pace, floating nearby like a calm companion. Tools, you sense, are not heroes in this story. They are helpers. They make effort gentler, not instant. You feel reassured by that. Your breath stays slow, syncing with the movement of the water. The distant hum returns, slightly closer now, like something working patiently in the background. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, steady and reliable. You imagine the gradual steps humans take towards space. Each one small enough to feel safe. Each one tested, adjusted, repeated. There is no sprint here. Only endurance. Only the warmth that comes from progress that does not strain the body or the mind. The tide rolls forward again, lifting you just a little, then setting you down. Effort, you realize, feels different when it is chosen carefully. It does not tighten the chest. It does not steal sleep. It feels like purpose stretched out over time, giving rest equal importance to motion. Asteroid mining, framed this way, loses its sharpness. It becomes an extension of patience rather than ambition. The cost is not something to minimize aggressively. It is something to respect. Pushing too hard would disturb the water. Moving too gently keeps the surface smooth. You think, briefly, that humans often forget this. They rush toward distant things and then wonder why they are tired when they arrive. The tide never seems tired. It just keeps moving. A small moment of humor drifts through you. If tides had meetings, you imagine they would be very short. Still moving? Yes. Good. And then a long pause. You smile, and the thought dissolves. The science beneath this calm remains present. Space travel demands energy, coordination, and care. Each movement outward requires balance inward. Nothing here is free, but nothing here is reckless either. Costs exist to protect as much as to limit. You breathe in. You breathe out. You notice how the idea of cost no longer feels heavy. It feels like responsibility carried willingly. Like knowing how much water you can swim through before resting again. This knowledge does not discourage movement. It guides it. The islands ahead remain distant, but they feel reachable in the same way a long shoreline walk feels reachable. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually. And when that moment arrives, it will feel earned rather than forced. The water grows slightly warmer again, wrapping around you like reassurance. The tide continues its patient roll, steady and forgiving. It does not punish pauses. It incorporates them. You realize that progress does not need urgency to be real. It needs rhythm. Move. Rest. Adjust. Repeat. The tide has been doing this longer than any plan or blueprint. Your body feels relaxed, supported by the motion beneath you. You are being carried without being hurried. This feels important. This feels sustainable. Asteroid mining, at this stage, is still mostly about reaching. About learning how to move outward without losing balance. About understanding that distance is not an obstacle, but a teacher. The hum deepens slightly, like a heartbeat you can finally hear clearly. You let it fade into the background again. You do not need to hold it. Your breathing remains slow. In. Out. The tide rolls forward once more, steady and patient, and you sense that the water itself is teaching you something about effort, about how to go far without strain, about how to arrive without exhaustion. As you drift onward, carried by this quiet momentum, you feel the next idea beginning to form ahead of you. The water does not rush you toward it. It simply keeps moving, confident that you will reach it when the time feels right. You feel the change before you see it. The water beneath you rises just slightly, enough to notice, not enough to alarm. It is the kind of change your body recognizes instinctively, the way you sense a tide coming in long before it reaches your feet. You breathe in. You breathe out. Nothing is threatened. Nothing is rushed. Supply, you realize, does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives the way the sea does, inch by inch, wave by wave, patient and almost invisible. One moment the shoreline looks the same as it always has. Then, quietly, it does not. You float and watch this gentle expansion unfold. Abundance here does not feel like excess. It feels like coverage. Like water reaching places that were once dry, not to overwhelm them, but to soften their edges. The tide does not argue with the land. It negotiates, slowly, shaping new boundaries through repetition rather than force. You breathe again. In. Out. Asteroid resources drift back into your awareness, but now they feel less distant, less abstract. Not closer in space, but closer in consequence. You imagine materials flowing gradually into human systems, not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough to change pressure points, to ease strain where scarcity once pulled too tightly. The science of supply feels almost biological tonight. When nourishment becomes steady, systems relax. When resources feel reliable, panic fades. The tide understands this. It never floods on purpose. It simply follows its rhythm until balance shifts. You feel calm thinking about that. Economics, in this frame, loses its sharp elbows. It is no longer about racing or winning. It becomes about distribution, timing, and care. When supply grows slowly, markets do not shatter. They stretch. They adapt. Coastlines redraw themselves over years, not moments. You notice how your body responds to this idea. Your breathing deepens. Your jaw unclenches. There is relief in imagining change that does not demand vigilance. The water rises a little more, lapping softly now, familiar and unthreatening. You recognize this sensation. It is the feeling of something becoming normal. The kind of change that, after a while, you stop naming because it simply belongs. A gentle humor drifts through your thoughts. Humans, you think, are very good at panicking about waves and very bad at noticing tides. By the time they argue, the water has already moved on. You smile, letting the thought pass like foam dissolving on the surface. The distant hum continues, steady and low. It feels wider now, as if it fills more space without getting louder. Scale expands, but intensity does not. This feels important. You imagine a world where materials from space slowly supplement what already exists. Not replacing, not conquering. Just supporting. Like a higher tide that allows boats to move more freely without changing the shape of the harbor overnight. Supply, you sense, becomes soothing when it is predictable. You breathe in. You breathe out. Asteroid mining, in this chapter of the story, is no longer about effort or reach. It is about effect. About how gentle increases ripple outward. About how abundance does not have to announce itself to be meaningful. The tide now touches ground you recognize. Familiar systems. Familiar expectations. You sense how people adjust without realizing it. How scarcity loosens its grip gradually, not dramatically. How attention shifts away from survival and toward care. This does not feel like a revolution. It feels like a settling. The science remains present but unintrusive. Supply and demand are not enemies here. They are partners in a slow dance, each responding to the other's movement. When supply grows patiently, demand softens. When pressure eases, choices widen. You feel that widening inside yourself. The water carries you gently forward, and you notice how stable everything feels. Nothing tips. Nothing rushes. The tide is higher now, but it is still the same tide. This realization brings a quiet comfort. Growth does not always mean transformation. Sometimes it simply means more room to breathe. You breathe again, slow and deep. There is a softness in imagining abundance that does not provoke fear. No hoarding. No collapse. Just gradual accommodation. Like learning a new depth of water and trusting your body to float there too. You think briefly about how humans often fear too much. Too much rain. Too much change. Too much supply. But the sea has always held more water than anyone could use, and still it finds balance. The problem has never been abundance. It has always been timing. The tide knows exactly when to arrive. Your body feels supported, buoyed by the idea that scale can be gentle. That growth can be quiet. That supply, when allowed to expand slowly, becomes background rather than threat. The hum deepens again, not louder, just broader, like a horizon you can hear if you listen closely. You let it be. Asteroid resources, imagined this way, feel less like a wave crashing into markets and more like sea level rising over generations. No single moment defines the change. It becomes noticeable only in hindsight, when people realize how much easier movement has become. You float in that ease now. Your breathing remains steady. In. Out. The tide laps at familiar ground, and nothing breaks. Everything adjusts. You feel reassured by this quiet adaptability. By the sense that systems, like shorelines, are capable of reshaping themselves without panic. As the water continues its slow, confident rise, you sense that attention will soon turn back toward home. Toward Earth. Toward the shores that have carried so much weight for so long. For now, the tide keeps moving, calm and expansive, preparing the ground gently for the next thought, as if inviting you to notice what changes when the sea begins to give back. You begin to notice the shoreline behind you. Not because the tide pulls you away from it, but because it remains present, steady in your awareness. The water beneath you continues its gentle motion, rising and falling in a familiar rhythm, and now the light shifts just enough for you to see Earth more clearly. You breathe in. You breathe out. The sight feels grounding, not heavy. Earth watches the waves. You sense the planet not as a place of urgency or damage, but as a living shore that has carried countless tides before this one. Forests, mountains, oceans, cities, all shaped by pressure and patience. All still here. The idea of space resources does not feel like abandonment. It feels like support arriving quietly from offshore. The tide rolls, reflective and calm. Mining away from Earth, you realize, is not about turning your back. It is about easing the strain. Like stepping off a crowded shoreline so it has room to recover its shape. You imagine the planet exhaling slowly as pressure lifts, just a little. You breathe with it. This thought does not promise perfection. It does not guarantee healing. It offers something gentler. Time. Space. Possibility. Environmental relief arrives the way moonlight arrives on water, softly, without claiming to fix everything at once. You feel comforted by that honesty. The science beneath this feeling remains quiet but clear. Extracting resources from space can reduce the need to disturb Earth's surface so intensely. Not eliminate it. Not erase the past. Just soften the future. The tide knows this kind of compromise well. It does not undo erosion. It slows it. You float, supported, listening to the distant hum that now feels like a heartbeat shared between sea and shore. It is steady, patient, unimpressed by drama. A small, gentle humor drifts through your thoughts. Humans often expect the planet to forgive instantly, as if apologies alone could regrow forests overnight. Earth, you sense, prefers consistency. Show up gently, again and again. The tide chuckles silently, approving. You breathe in. You breathe out. Care for the planet, framed this way, feels less like guilt and more like relationship. Like choosing not to lean so hard on something you love. Space resources become a way of redistributing weight, not escaping responsibility. You imagine Earth at night, seen from above. Quiet lights scattered across its surface. Oceans dark and calm. Clouds drifting without concern. The planet does not look fragile from here. It looks resilient. Still, resilience does not mean invincibility. The tide understands that too. The water beneath you reflects moonlight now, shimmering gently. Each wave carries a reminder that giving back does not require grand gestures. Sometimes it is enough to step aside and let systems breathe. You feel a quiet care settle in your chest. Not alarm. Not urgency. Just attentiveness. The kind that notices strain and responds before something breaks. Asteroid mining, in this moment, feels like an extension of that attentiveness. A way of saying, you can rest a little, to the ground beneath your feet. The promise is soft, and it stays honest by remaining incomplete. You breathe again, slow and deep. Hope appears here not as certainty, but as direction. As the knowledge that choices can be made with care. That tides can be guided gently rather than fought. The future does not have to be loud to be better. The tide reflects Earth's light back toward you, wave after wave, like a conversation carried across distance. Neither side demands anything. Both remain present. Your body feels warm, held by water and thought alike. The motion beneath you is steady, reassuring. You are not being carried away from home. You are being shown another way to care for it. As the tide continues its patient rhythm, your attention begins to drift toward the boundaries that shape this shared sea, the quiet rules, the evolving agreements, the invisible lines that form when many shores must coexist. You float there, breathing slowly, as moonlight ripples across the water, and the next idea waits calmly ahead, shaped like a coastline still being written. You notice lines forming in the water. Not sharp lines. Not borders you could draw with certainty. They appear the way coastlines do, uneven, patient, shaped by countless small movements rather than a single decision. You breathe in. You breathe out. The tide beneath you slows, as if paying attention. Rules, you realize, often begin this way. Before they are written, they are felt. Before they are enforced, they are negotiated quietly by repetition and need. You float and watch how the water meets the land, never asking permission, never forcing agreement. It simply arrives, again and again, until a shape becomes familiar. This is how law feels in space. There are no fences here. No walls. Only distance and shared awareness. The idea of ownership softens when there is so much water between shores. You sense that claiming becomes less important than coordinating. Less about possession, more about care. You breathe again. In. Out. Asteroids drift in this space like neutral ground, quiet and unassuming. They do not belong to anyone yet, and perhaps they never will in the way land once did. The tide does not own the shore it shapes. It only interacts with it, adjusting its touch over time. You find comfort in that comparison. Space law, you feel, is not something declared. It is something grown. Agreements form the way sandbars do, where repeated movement makes certain paths easier than others. What works stays. What strains dissolves. The water remembers. The distant hum feels attentive now, like a group of voices speaking softly rather than one voice giving orders. Governance here feels distributed, shared, aware that no single perspective can hold the whole horizon. A small, sleepy smile crosses your thoughts. Humans, you think, are very fond of straight lines. Nature has always preferred curves. The tide seems to agree, tracing another gentle arc along the shore. You imagine early laws of the sea back on Earth. How they formed to prevent collision, to ensure passage, to protect what moved slowly and what moved fast. Space feels similar, only quieter. The same questions arise, just farther from land. Who passes first? Who waits? Who takes care when something goes wrong? You breathe in slowly. You breathe out, feeling your body sink a little deeper into the water's support. Ownership, in this space, feels less sharp, less absolute. It becomes temporary, conditional, responsive. More like stewardship than control. You sense that this softness is not weakness. It is adaptability. The tide survives because it does not insist. You let that thought rest. Asteroid mining within these boundaries feels calmer now. Less like a race, more like a shared understanding. The rules do not rush development. They pace it. They exist to keep motion smooth, to prevent sudden waves that could unsettle the entire surface. The water remains calm around you, as if demonstrating the point. Another gentle moment of humor drifts by. If asteroids could vote, you imagine they would all abstain. They have waited this long. They are in no hurry to take sides. You smile, and the thought fades. The science beneath governance stays present but unobtrusive. Coordination prevents interference. Shared norms reduce risk. Slow consensus avoids sharp conflict. None of this requires intensity. It only requires patience. You feel how breathing steadies when things are predictable. In. Out. In. Out. The tide waits now, neither advancing nor retreating, as if observing the shape it has helped create. Boundaries feel clear enough to navigate, soft enough to adapt. This balance feels rare and precious. You sense that laws written like coastlines will never be finished. They will shift with use, with discovery, with care. And that is not a flaw. It is how they remain alive. Your body feels warm, grounded, held by water and understanding alike. There is safety in knowing that even far from Earth, humans bring with them the instinct to negotiate rather than conquer. To listen before acting. As the tide resumes its gentle motion, you feel your attention beginning to drift forward again. Beyond rules. Beyond structure. Toward time itself, toward futures that arrive so gradually they barely announce themselves. You float there, breathing steadily, while the water waits just long enough to feel complete, before carrying you onward into what comes next. You are still floating, but time feels different now. Not faster. Not slower. Just wider. The water beneath you continues its steady motion, and you realize that you are no longer watching individual waves. You are sensing the pattern they form together. You breathe in. You breathe out. The future does not feel ahead of you. It feels around you. This is how change often arrives. Not with a knock. Not with an announcement. It arrives the way morning light fills a room while you sleep. By the time you notice it, it has already been there for a while. The tide understands this better than anyone. It never asks for attention. It just keeps returning. You let your mind drift forward gently, not jumping years, but sliding through them like water along a shore. Decades pass the way evenings do, one blending into the next. Asteroid mining, once distant and abstract, becomes part of the background. Not exciting. Not alarming. Simply present. You feel surprisingly calm about that. The extraordinary has a way of becoming ordinary when it behaves politely. When it arrives slowly enough to be absorbed rather than resisted. You imagine space resources flowing quietly into human systems, not changing everything, just easing certain pressures. Like adding another inlet to a bay so the water moves more freely. You breathe again. In. Out. Economics, in this future, feels less like a headline and more like weather. Always there. Rarely dramatic. People stop talking about it in urgent tones. They begin to trust the rhythm. Markets adjust without panic. Expectations soften. The tide settles into a pace everyone learns to live with. You sense that familiarity forming. There is a gentle comfort in knowing that most important changes do not need constant attention. They work best when they fade into routine. The tide rises and falls whether you watch it or not. Its reliability becomes invisible, and that invisibility is its success. A quiet, sleepy humor drifts through your thoughts. Humans once argued fiercely about whether ships should exist. Now they argue about the snacks on board. Progress, you think, has a funny way of normalizing itself. You smile, and the thought dissolves. The science beneath this future remains steady and unglamorous. Systems adapt. Supply and demand learn each other's habits. New resources do not rewrite the rules, they soften them. The shoreline changes shape, but the sea remains the sea. You feel grounded by that continuity. Your body feels heavier now, supported by water that seems to know you better. The distant hum fades into something almost like silence, not because it stops, but because it no longer stands out. This is what stability sounds like. You breathe slowly. In. Out. You imagine children growing up in this future, unaware that space resources were ever controversial. To them, it is just how things work. Like tides, like seasons. They do not marvel at it. They simply rely on it. There is peace in that thought. The sea around you feels settled, no longer rising noticeably, no longer testing the shore. It has found a level that feels right. You float easily, without adjusting your posture, without thinking about balance. Trust has replaced vigilance. You realize that patience has quietly transformed into confidence. Asteroid mining, in this vision, does not dominate conversation. It supports it. It exists in the background of choices, enabling gentler decisions elsewhere. The future feels less strained, not because everything is solved, but because not everything feels urgent anymore. You breathe again, deep and slow. Time continues to pass, but you no longer track it. Years move like waves you do not count. The future does not demand attention. It simply unfolds. The tide maintains its familiar rhythm, and you sense that this rhythm has always been the destination. Not dramatic change, but livable continuity. Not disruption, but adjustment. You float in that ease now, calm and unbothered, aware that the sea has done what it always does best. It has made something new feel natural. As your breathing remains steady, your awareness begins to drift once more, gently turning back toward the shoreline where you first began. Toward the place where reflection waits. The water carries you without effort, preparing you to stand once more at the edge, where past and future meet quietly, and the tide continues its endless, patient motion. You step lightly into the shallows. The water laps at your ankles, steady and reassuring. You breathe in, feeling the coolness meet warmth, the motion meeting stillness. You breathe out, letting the rhythm of waves settle into your chest. Here at the edge, the tide's journey becomes tangible. You feel it not as motion, but as understanding. Everything you have sensed before, distance, abundance, care, patience, comes together now. The stones drifting offshore, the long memory of resources, the quiet rules, the gradual arrival of supply all merge into a horizon that feels known and safe. Asteroids no longer seem distant. Their materials are not treasure nor threat. They are possibilities, quietly held and waiting, just as you have learned to hold your own attention. Economics is no longer a race or a puzzle. It is a rhythm, measured not in numbers but in patience, effort, and timing. You notice how your body rests more easily than before. Shoulders release. Eyes soften. The water supports you, carrying away tension with each wave. Every exhale is a little reminder that progress does not need urgency to be real. It only needs presence. You breathe in. You breathe out. In. Out. The tide whispers softly. It reminds you that care has always mattered more than speed. That effort directed gently and consistently shapes the world more than forceful gestures ever could. That value exists in the balance between giving and waiting, between reaching and allowing. A faint, gentle humor drifts through your mind. Humans, you think, are always in awe of distant horizons, when sometimes the nearest shore is already perfect for standing. You smile, letting the thoughts settle like smooth stones in shallow water. You watch the tide continue to roll. It carries lessons in its motion, patience, persistence, calm. It does not demand you follow. It only shows what is possible when change moves slowly, evenly, and with care. The sun, or perhaps moonlight, soft and silvery, glances across the water, catching your eyes. Each reflection reminds you that abundance is not always loud, and value does not always need a price tag. Sometimes it exists quietly, patiently, waiting for attention, not obsession. You breathe in deeply. You feel the warmth of water, the cool air, the gentle pulse of earth beneath your feet. You breathe out, letting a soft serenity spread through your body. Your awareness expands, quietly taking in everything learned from the tide and the stones, the distant shores, and the journey through the currents of time and effort. Asteroid resources, space economics, and human patience all fold into a single realization: progress is a quiet tide. It is steady. It is patient. It arrives in its own time, long after you have learned to wait. You look outward again, across the water. The tide continues its endless motion. Waves roll, rise, and fall. The horizon stretches into infinity, soft and inviting. You know that the journey continues, even if you rest. The water moves. The stones drift. The future arrives slowly, naturally, without demand. You breathe in one last long, slow inhale. You breathe out fully, feeling the tide's motion in every fiber. You are calm. You are safe. You are connected. And though you pause here at the water's edge, the world continues its gentle rhythm, carrying you forward softly, patiently, always.